Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what the heck's wrong with you? It's free, and we are giving free thought leadership out twice a week, every single week. Welcome to the Ethicsverse. We got a great show for you today. We are going to be talking about something that should be on all of your minds. We're going to break down the DOJ's new corporate enforcement policy. We're going to talk about what changed, what stayed the same, and what the priorities are now. So we're going to dig into that and what that means for self-disclosure, for getting a cooperation credit, for remediation and things like that. And we're going to talk about some practical steps that you can start taking today to align your programs with what the DOJ is actually looking for. So this is a master class. Expect to go deep, sharpen your pencils, get your coffee, and we're going to dive right in. We got the one and only Mike Volkov. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for him. And of course, the coolest guy in compliance is back, the one and only Matt Kelly. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. I'm going to run through a couple of quick announcements here. Lickety split, and we are going to get moving. Also, for all Ethicsverse members, we got a very special infographic that summarizes everything we're going to be talking about today. So if you have not subscribed yet, now's the time to do it. Of course, it's free. We're giving away credits for Compliance Certification Board, for SHRM, and for HRCI. And of course, we're giving out books. So we have, today we're giving out one of my favorite books. It's still flying off the shelves, if you can believe it. Allison Taylor, our good friend of the show, wrote this phenomenal book called Higher Ground. If you have not read it, it is well worth your time. And if you don't want to spend any money, which is fine, drop some smart comments or some smart tips in the chat and win yourself a book. We are also talking about our benchmark report. So if you have not seen our benchmark report webinar, which we did with the one and only Ellen Hunt, one of my all-time faves, I encourage you to check that out on YouTube. We're going to be doing a deep dive on that. There were so many questions we weren't able to cover in the 90-minute session. So we're going to have another session on that. And also stay tuned if you're in healthcare. Our brand new healthcare benchmark report is coming out. So a lot of great takeaways from 2025. The report itself, which should be available on your console there to download, is full of analysis, is full of tips on how you can optimize your program. We're stepping into an era where ethics and compliance can really become this partner to the business, can really drive business strategy forward in a more in a less risky way. But it's going to take us doing things a little bit different. What got us here is not going to get us there. And so check out this this report that people seem to be loving. My texts are blowing up. We're already up to 1,000 emojis. I'm feeling phenomenal today. Want to share a little bit more about this first AI native third-party risk management platform. We are talking massive savings. So the whole premise here is that AI does the work, you make the decisions. You can control where the humans are in the loop. You can automate so much of this arduous process that ends up, sometimes holding up the business, that ends up making compliance feel like they're a drag on the business. We can automate that and give you a lot of extra insight. So if you feel like third-party risks are big and you feel like there's more responsibility dumped on your team and there's not the increase in the resources that you would like, it's time to get smart with tools, time to get smart with technology. And so if you're interested in finding out about this beta, we've gotten a lot of phenomenal feedback on it. I can't stop talking about this thing, but if you're interested in participating in the beta, we're going to be closing that pretty soon. Look at these screenshots. I mean, imagine working in this instead of working through your email. If you'd like to check out the beta, hit this QR code here and we can set up a call to see if it makes sense for you to participate. Zero obligation, zero cost as well. We've also been talking a lot about disclosures. On Tuesday, we had a session with the one and only Ross Ronan. We were talking to almost 1,000 compliance professionals, compliance executives on how we can gather more risk intelligence. The name of our game is to utilize all the channels that are available and to automate and make easy, reduce the friction for people to share the risk intelligence that's kind of drifting throughout our organizations. So a great way to do that is with our disclosure platform. If you have not reimagine disclosures beyond conflicts of interest, I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. We had a whole session on myriad use cases of this disclosure platform to get more of that unique risk intelligence that only compliance can get, that then can lead to a lot of insights at the board level. So if you're interested in finding out some more of that, let us know. And if you're interested about getting better at compliance and learning more about what's out there or just sounding smart in your board meetings, you should definitely be following Matt Kelly on LinkedIn, of course, foregone conclusion. But open up a new tab, go over to Radical Compliance, and right on the right-hand side, there's a place for you to drop your email address in. He doesn't spam you. It comes with phenomenal insights from the one and only Matt Kelly. I don't know, is it every day, Matt? It seems like every single day. So great content coming from Matt Kelly. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to the one and only. Oh, here's a little screenshot Look at this. JOA is lickety split. Here's a little screenshot, a little glimpse of the infographic that covers this first ever department-wide compliance enforcement policy. Our team put this together, so you can have all that information right at your fingertips. So now is the time to subscribe. I'm going to pass it over to Matt Kelly, and we will dive right in. How's it going, Matt?
It is going very well, Nick. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody who is joining us here today. So yes, as he said, we are here today to talk about this new Justice Department corporate enforcement policy. In some ways, it builds on things that we have all already come to know and understand for many years. In other ways, it is, I think, breaking at least some new ground. It is allegedly department-wide, but we have a lot to discuss about the effort to get more self-disclosure, what a good remediation of a compliance program actually looks like, what is entailed for cooperation, what are the benefits that you get, when do you get a declination, when would you not? There is literally a flow chart in the policy. I don't know that we're going to have that. We won't go through the whole thing, but I mean, it is that much of a complex maze. So joining us to help decipher what is new, what is important, what is not, we have Mike Volkov, who runs his own Volkov Law Group, compliance and corporate defense law firm, has been doing that for many, many years, and he knows all of this stuff at the Justice Department cold. Mike, great to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nick, great.
This is like royalty we got here. Okay, we got the king here today.
No, when I got on, I said, how could I not appear with Elvis and the Beatles? And we definitely have two of the thought leaders, and you guys, it's a real honor to be with you. The intro that Nick just did, by the way, inspired me so much, because within the space of 5 minutes, he covered all the important trends in ethics and compliance. And I vow to you, Nick, because you've got everybody motivated. And now, we're going to get into tinkering with, corporate enforcement policy and all of that. But I have to say, there's actually some interesting developments in terms of what Matt is saying. Some is the same, some is not. And there's some really new things that, we'll get to when we talk about it. But it's good to talk about this in general. I feel like people sort of say, oh, if I get ever in trouble, then I'll have to worry about this. But that's not really true. There's ways to avoid getting in trouble and making your life easier. But anyways, back to you, Matt.
Well, just one quick note for all the listeners here. Certainly, if you do have questions along the way about anything that's on your mind about the policy, how the Justice Department plans to use it, how you might want to think about it, or talk to your board and management team about it, pop questions either into the attendee chat or the Q&A function. The folks behind the scenes will work to get those questions to us, and we'll try to get them answered as they come in. If not, we will certainly save the last 10 minutes or so for a dedicated Q&A. But this is all for the benefit of the attendees and the listeners. So whatever is on your mind, let us know, and we'll try and make sure we can answer all of your questions. That said, so Mike, I will tilt back to you first, and then Nick. The enforcement policy came out, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They did make a big splash about it. However, I still think it kind of hits on the same notes we've heard for a decade: self-disclose, cooperate, remediate. So what is new here for compliance officers to think about if they were going to brief senior management on the board and say, this is why we have to think about this now, instead of the 5 other times I've talked about it previously? What is the new that we need to keep in mind?
Well, first off, let's talk about, let's use Donna Bohm and the line that she always said, that there's certain things that are board worthy, meaning you put on the chair of each of your board members and make sure they read it. Remember those days when we used to put paper there? And this is board worthy. And I'm going to give you a headline, which is, and people are going to be surprised by this, but this is just recently, we had the first case where this worked exactly the way that people have intended this to work for 20 years. And the case is the Balt case, where the company got a declination, and in exchange, and what they delivered were two executives to be prosecuted. Well, one was a third party, and one was an executive. And the intent behind this, is confess your sins, come to us and confess your sins, turn around and make our life easier by giving us the evidence to prosecute individuals within your company or related to this misconduct, and you shall be relieved of all your sins. Okay? And it worked. And it was probably the most effective way I've seen it work. We've always heard this lip service to, we want to get individuals. We want to get individuals. We want to get individuals. Companies would come in, they'd try to get help on that, and they'd still end up paying 150, 200 million. And they'd say, why did we do this? We didn't get that much of a benefit. But here, the Balt case and the tinkering with this policy combined to basically demonstrate that this administration is going to hand out declinations. It's not just a presumption anymore. You come in and confess and God will absolve you. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I think the tinkering with the language, I know that lawyers, we always get criticized for, trying to inflate our importance over language. But the language here makes a difference. And it gives lawyers a chance to go into the department and argue, hey, we deserve a declination. We did this. We did voluntary disclosure. We did remediation. We cooperated fully. You deliver, if you go in with an executive's head on the, ready to prosecute, you're going to get out of this. That's the message to me. You're not going to pay a penny except disgorgement. All right. And I think that the other headline I would say, the other headline is DOJ is telling the defense bar, we're not going to ever have a situation like ABB again over voluntary disclosure. Meaning, and I'm going to go through that. Voluntary disclosure, ABB gets screwed because their lawyer calls up DOJ and says, hey, we want to come in and talk to you, which means we want to come in and, disclose. In the interim, between the time of the call and the meeting itself, public report comes out about ABB's corruption. They didn't get voluntary disclosure credit in that situation. And so, practically everybody's saying, this is form over substance. What are these lawyers doing? Because their intent was when the lawyer called, he doesn't want to say it over the phone, although he should have. I would have. But he didn't want to say it over the phone. So now they tinkered with the language to say, we're not going to get into this form over substance technicality rule. If you come in with intent, you display all your evidence, you're going to get a declination. And by the way, even if you're a recidivist. Okay, so Siemens resuscitates its operations after paying $800 million, goes through this whole thing, comes in. I'll bet you right now they'd get a declination, even though they're the poster child for, some of the worst cases that we've ever seen. So that's my initial reaction.
In a bit, I want to take a deeper dive into that Balt FCPA case, which did stand out to me. Came out about a week after this enforcement policy.
Exactly.
Nick, give me your thoughts too here. Is this going to be a sufficiently strong lever that companies will now start to say, okay, yeah, we are going to take this seriously. Let's self-disclose and confess our sins and offer up an executive who is going to face consequences? And do you think this is going to move that needle or change that mindset?
I think I don't know how quickly it'll change the mindset, but I think this shift from presumptive to guaranteed declination, I think that that's really material. And, like all tools or like all like levers, it kind of just depends the extent to which we use it. And I'm talking about we in terms of, compliance, because probably, the executive team is not, scouring, the web, the internet for like DOJ pronouncements and, new guidance that's coming out. So I think there's a really smart way that you could frame this to your board, something like, we've just, the government issued us a roadmap telling us exactly how we can avoid prosecution. The only question is whether or not we'll use it. And so I think, again, coming to these conversations with executives or with leadership with a perspective and leaning into that information asymmetry that, we're talking about on the show all the time can do a lot to get things unlocked. And again, I just always think it's on us to turn those light bulbs on at the top. I mean, what Mike said, I think is totally spot on. We have a clear path now. We have a great example of somebody that sort of took advantage of that. And it just kind of, it seems like in guidance after guidance that comes out, they're trying to get more clear on the incentives that are actually in play and provide more clarity for us, in-house or, within organizations on how they would like us to behave. I think on our last show or maybe two shows ago, Matt, you were talking about, Blanche and his, it was, I think it was the one with Karen Moore.
Yep.
And you were talking about Blanche, he's underscoring once again that individual accountability is the primary goal. It's a stronger deterrent than like fines that come, years after after an investigation begins. And so I think boards need to absolutely hear that. It's not the company's name on the indictment. It can be an individual's name on the indictment. And again, when they're giving us a script or they're giving, DOJ is giving us a formula that they want us to follow, and we have some now proof points that are beyond sort of words on the page. They're actual, this case that Mike was just talking about, where the declination is sort of guaranteed when there are individuals that can be held accountable. I think it gives us a sort of a new era or a new chapter that we're stepping into, and it's on us to kind of take advantage of this new clarity that they're providing.
Now, Mike, I wanted to ask you two other questions more about the sweep and the scope of this policy, where the Justice Department was very quick to say this is department-wide. So my two specific questions are, A, does that include the antitrust? Because I've always heard antitrust is never part of the department-wide. It's always dancing to its own tune. But number two, does this also apply to U.S. attorneys around the country? Because I have, over the years, been told many times that the Maine Justice Department comes out with a policy and U.S. attorneys say, who cares? I don't know if that's true or not, but antitrust and individual U.S. attorneys, how much are they going to dance along with this new department-wide?
Well, antitrust is different. And they, and it's, and I worked, when I had brown hair, I worked in the antitrust division. And, we used to, they refer to themselves as the division. Okay. Like we are the only division. Mm-hmm. And that mindset, they're filled with brilliant economists and people who can, analyze the economy and business relationships. And they have their own leniency program, which is, you have 5 members of a cartel. The first member to come in and rat out the other 4 gets immunity. The next one gets less, has to pay a little bit of a price, and so on down the line. So I don't think this is now. Here's where it will affect. The first or second company may have more ammunition to say, look, you guys, even treat this akin or analogous to the corporate enforcement policy that applies to the other divisions. So I think it'll have some impact. I generally think the attitude and ideology of this Justice Department is we're not going to hammer corporations, particularly if they do the right thing. Okay, that's just what it is. We're not anti-corporations, and we're going to not harm as many people. And in fact, who knows who's getting, passes or investigations are being closed down and whatnot. We don't know. Okay. Second, your second point about U.S. attorneys' offices, You are right that when I was at a U.S. attorney office, we don't like justice. We don't really care. We don't think that they know what they're doing. And in the U.S. attorney's office, so there's a general sort of snobbery there of we're not going to follow every policy to the T. But the U.S. attorneys are required to. The offices are required to. And frankly, I think the defense bar should use it as much as they can in dealing with AUSAs in those. But, you identify two areas where this is going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think the antitrust division will be more lenient than they are in their leniency policy, okay, using this. And I think you're right to point that out. And I think U.S. attorneys' offices are going to be, in the end, more lenient than they would otherwise want to be. Because those deals still got to be approved at the criminal division level. And that's where the politicos come in, and that's where the politicos have this policy. And I can be critical of the Justice Department. I love the place. I love the institution. I spent so much of my time there in my career. But this is, I know it doesn't seem like this is a big development on its face, but the way it's being implemented is. And that's what, now, does that guarantee that in the next administration, they're not going to come out with their own new corporate enforcement policy? You and I, the three of us, have been around long enough that every administration comes out with a new corporate enforcement policy. And do I think this is going to be there forever? I think that if it's shown to be successful, people are going to be hard pressed to push it back. That's what I think. So that's why the Balt case, and we may see more of these cases, you guys. We may see more of these cases, which is going to entrench the institution into this model as we go along.
So I wanted to ask another question about self-disclosure, not just, should you or should you not? I'm always going to say, yes, you should. But I was curious about when they say prompt self-disclosure, how prompt is prompt. And going back to the Balt FCPA case, if I'm remembering right, they disclosed to the Justice Department and French anti-corruption people, Balt's a French medical device company.
Right.
They disclosed within I think a month of finding this out. And there's no way they would have had a complete investigation within a month. But they still stepped forward and said, we have a thing. And they didn't know where that disclosure might take them. It might have taken them out behind a woodshed for an unpleasant experience. It didn't. But I'm trying to get a sense of how much does that help if you disclose even before you've completed your own internal investigation, or should you complete it, or does it not make a difference? But, how prompt is prompt? What's our window?
I think oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick. No. Go ahead, Nick.
I think it's kind of the spirit of the law here. I mean, I think they're trying to convey a certain spirit, right? There's these three layers these three sort of tiers, depending on how quickly you self-disclose, how voluntary it is, if you fully cooperate, are you remediating in a timely way? If there's no aggravating circumstances, that's that kind of guaranteed declination path one. And so the spirit of the law, I think, that they're trying to kind of describe in words here is a good faith effort to disclose if you know that something's wrong. I think if you try to play too many games, again, this is just my kind of perspective of, reading through this and some other kind of commentaries on it, to the extent that you're trying to kind of thread the needle and, kind of play games and look more to the letter of the law, I think that kind of increases some risk for you. They talk about this 120 day, thing, this 120 day, after you receive an internal report, maybe that's a fine, gauge for it. But kind of to your point, Matt, I would say in general, probably the sooner the better, if you're going to take a good faith effort to remediate,
I totally agree. Nick, I totally agree with the way you phrase that, because, prompt is prompt depending upon how you explain it. Okay. And they're always, to me, it's just sort of if you can show the Justice Department your intent, which was to look at this quickly and make sure that you want to make this disclosure, I think you've got to do that. even without having the investigation resolved. It's not going to be resolved that quickly. Look, the two best examples, Cognizant, years ago, which found the problem and then within 2 weeks turned in information on their CEO and I think it was the CFO and the general counsel, as I recall. Okay, they turned around and did that without any investigation. And so they got huge benefits, and rightfully so, in that situation. That's the way we want it to operate. Vault did the same. To me, 30 days is pretty fast in a corporate governance type of situation where you have to make sure everybody knows what they're getting into. And I think Vault was vindicated. I think your position, Matt, and I've always heard you articulate the benefits of disclosure and why would you play games with it when you know you have something wrong that you've engaged in. So you turn it over as quickly as you can. And I think that they are, again, by their deeds, trying to reinforce that message and embolden the compliance person, embolden the general counsel to say, we've got a problem, we got to go to DOJ and disclose this. I do think there's another, and we'll get to this later if you want, but there are real compliance implications of this. In other words, if I'm the chief compliance officer right now at a company, this is an important opportunity for me now to once again be like a broken record and explain to the board again why ethics and compliance is important and why ethical companies are more financially successful in the long run. Doesn't guarantee your success, but you're going to make a premium by being an ethical and compliant company. And this gives us an opportunity because they also emphasize, again, remediation and principles that permeate, their guidance that's been sitting out there for years. And I think to the extent we have all of our brethren here on this and sisterin, on this podcast in this episode, this is an opportunity for us to trumpet ethics and compliance and the importance of it to the board.
Right.
So 2 quick points, 1 quick point and then a question. I do love the Cognizant Technologies FCPA example where they did disclose right away. Might I point out that at that time they had an ethics and compliance officer on their board audit committee. He was the CCO of another defense firm that was out there. So yet again, reason why companies should have ethics and compliance officers on their boards.
Terrific.
I've found like maybe 3 examples in 25 years of that happening, but it happens. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit here for a company taking the cynical position. This seems pretty small. We're going to keep it quiet about it. It's not like the Justice Department is going to find out. They're a mess. They've laid off tons of staff. They're at each other's throats. People are quitting all the time. The place is a total disaster zone right now. I don't know that that's going to change anytime soon. Why should I take this risk? I'm just going to clean everything up and hope nobody notices. Explain to me why that is bad. And what would a compliance officer, what would you recommend he or she do if management comes back and says, nope, we're not going to disclose. We're just going to sit tight and hope nobody notices. Like, does the CCO have a risk there now that they know this? Like, how would that work, Mike? What would you counsel?
Well, I was going to kick this over to Nick because that's too tough a question. But no, I would say this. Look, you're right when it comes to maybe the FCPA these days.
Yeah.
And that companies can be more. I've already seen a dramatic change in corporate attitudes towards FCPA enforcement, just the risk of it. Nobody's dismantling anything. Nobody's taking away anything. They're all committed to we don't bribe people because it's just good for business to be an ethical company. But in terms of, if you ask me what your risk of enforcement is, it's lower. It's much lower. However, if you're involved in international trade, you're on FCPA with steroids right now. Okay? They are hell-bent on prosecuting people and using the False Claims Act to go after trade violations. So to me, this is your protection in this new environment of it. It is a very aggressive enforcement environment. This is your protection. This policy, the elements of a compliant program. And look, let's be honest, nobody was putting lots of resources into trade compliance. True. But they should be, and they should have been. And now I see a more integrated approach of bringing trade into the overall program, where ethics is our first point. Second is we comply with the law. So now, for the people who want to play the cynical game, which is, okay, let's just fix the program, fix the violation, fix our compliance program, remediate the root cause, document everything, and just in case we're ever investigated under the statute of limitations of 5 years, we will have our defense ready to go. I think that's dangerous, because what are we seeing on the outside right now? Whistleblowers are emboldened. Whistleblowers, the DOJ is even paying whistleblowers more, giving them, their DOJ program incentives as well. And we have lots of lawyers out there who will help any whistleblower who wants to blow the whistle on any company with a deep pocket. And I think the risk of not dealing with the issue is still significant, in that a whistleblower, anybody who gets unhappy at a company, is going to end up, talking to whistleblower lawyers. So I don't know. I think that there's still a lot of reputational risk, and people, the consumers right now are just, people are really sort of ideological in their, in their purchase dollars.
Yeah.
And I think that you got to be careful about that. But anyways, that's sort of my initial reaction.
Nick, do you have any take on the cynical leaders out there who might want to just keep this under the rug and hope for the best?
Yeah, I think the incentive structure that is conveyed in this new guidance is really designed for lawyers. It's designed for compliance. It's not really designed for executives, right? Like, executives are thinking about stock price, and they're thinking about headlines in the Wall Street Journal. So I think until we can close that gap in how compliance presents these trade-offs and these decisions, I think it's easy for companies sort of writ large to take that sort of cynical kind of, approach that's basically silence. I do think the math is pretty compelling, though. Across these 3 tiers, on tier 1, you get like guaranteed 100%, declination. On tier 2, I think it's something like 50 to 75%. And then tier 3, you can still get up to 50% off the lower end of the, the fine range. So that is pretty compelling math. First of all. And then again, I mean, it's going to be kind of a function of the individual adversary, the person you're trying to convince, how they're wired. I think coupling this new guidance with the, underscored focus on individual accountability, it changes the calculus from an executive's perspective that they could be the person that, winds up in the orange jumpsuit themselves. So, I mean, to Mike's point, there's this little window, assuming Trump doesn't get a 3rd term, just kidding. There's this little window until a new administration comes in, where we need to take advantage of this. And, he said a word that's been kind of ringing in my head this whole time. We should use whatever's coming, something like this, we should use to embolden ourselves to drive these kind of conversations, because the math has changed a bit, right? There's a lot more clarity. There's more clarity in terms of the formulation, and there's more clarity in terms of the incentives that they want us to exhibit, right? Or like the behaviors they want us to exhibit in the context of this new, clarity around these incentives. And so, I mean, I would argue, if I was having this conversation, I would argue that the stock price hit from, the fact that any declination needs to be made public will pale in comparison to the stock price hit that would come from us actually getting in trouble and not hitting these top 3 tiers. I think as there's more sort of examples of, good companies, quote unquote, who are engaging in this process in a good faith, with good faith efforts, I think the, to Mike's point about the ideological concerns of the market, those are going to become more well-formed. And I think that can serve as a currency. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to kind of make the argument. I think, to kind of sum up everything I've just said, that cynicism is probably the strong force at the moment. But we, all that sort of, aggregated cynicism that kind of defines, corporate mentality is really a function of a bunch of individual decisions. And I think if we can embolden ourselves, given this new clarity, to drive our programs forward, we can start kind of turning some of those light bulbs on and start kind of changing the course of this battleship that is sort of corporate mindset,
So I want to shift gears a little bit to the cooperating and investigating part. Where that is the second prong. You've already self-disclosed. It's been prompt. Everybody loves that. Now you have to fully cooperate to pursue individual wrongdoers. Mike, one thing that I noticed in the policy that maybe I'm dorking out over this, but there's no such thing as dorking out too much here on the Ethicsverse. No. That they were clear in saying you start at 0 credit and then you get more depending on what you do. It is not that you get full credit assumed and then it's deducted based on things you don't do. Like, they called that dynamic out. And I was wondering why. And as a practical matter, what's the significance of stressing you start at 0 and then you earn credit? Because that almost sounds to me like they have you over a barrel and you have to do exactly what they want, or else you won't get that next little notch in the credit scale. Is that the right way to think about this, or how do we interpret all of that?
I don't think you're over geeking on this, because I think you're actually right. I think what they were facing were people who listened too much to us and would have like a checklist for cooperation. Right. And they'd come in with that checklist and say, okay, we've done what was done in all these other cases, X, Y, Z, and oh, we didn't do a good job on that. Okay. Well, maybe give us a little bit less than full cooperation, okay? And I think they're trying to change the dynamic, just like you said. You have to earn every penny of it. And that's because I think lawyers, unfortunately, were playing games with this. Mm-hmm. Totally. And trying to start, and I think that this is a reaction to exactly what, Matt, this is not an over geek. You guys, you and Nick, you're spot on to something. And this is important, because what happens when a document like this is prepared in DOJ, it goes through millions of people. You have no idea. When I worked there, we once had an email chain that started at a ceiling and we pasted it, on the wall. And these are high ceilinged offices, and it came all the way down just as a joke to show how much review is occurring. And so people with access to grind, and there are some lawyers who felt they were played with in this process, and they made sure that this language was included. So you're right to pick it up. Absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that's exactly spot on. I mean, if they're trying to get good faith participation, they're trying to get sort of full-hearted, remediation, how else would you do it? I'm just saying, like, people respond to incentives. Like, the words that are in the guidance, to Mike's point, they were, they weren't just like randomly put there, right? Like, there was a lot of thought that went into it. And I think if you're starting at 0, or like if you're not starting at 0, then it leaves a lot of room for people to play games with it and kind of do just the bare minimum in order to say, hey, I'm owed this. If you remove that and you say, look, you're starting at 0 and we will sort of situationally determine what a good faith effort is. That's just like my catch-all term for all these sort of components that they try to articulate in the guidance. Well, then the only way you can solve for that is by truly kind of putting a good faith effort. Because if you pull back on any one of those things, I don't know. It's like in school, right? Like, you start the semester everybody's at 0. You don't start with 100%. So you have to put that good faith effort into every single assignment. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it just comes down, they're in a tough spot because they're trying to give out guidance across all these different companies and all these different industries and sizes and all these different types of situations. At the core, I think they're trying to provide clarity around the incentives that they hope that we're responding to. And I think this is probably the smartest, cleanest way to do it. You start at 0 and we'll determine how good faith your remediation is and your participation and your self-disclosure and all those kinds of, cooperation elements are.
So here's another question.
Can
go
I
ahead.
offer, wait, Matt, can I offer just my own sort of geeky thing? Is to me, there was reference to deconfliction again. And I think deconfliction, when you are prioritizing prosecution of individuals, deconfliction, to me, the fact that they raised it again, I think made it a little bit more prominent in my mind when I'm reading it, my gestalt in reaction to it, is that because we're going to be prosecuting these individuals, we don't want you to be interviewing certain people as part of your investigation that's going to screw us up.
Right.
So deconflict with us. And I think that that's going to be a new challenging issue when you are operating under this incentive structure, because you want to hand them a case against an individual, but you don't want to conduct interviews that are going to screw up that case.
Well,
so you better be careful
about that, because another part of the language was that if you want full credit, what did they say? Like, you need to start immediately. Must demonstrate full cooperation at the earliest opportunity. And if you failed to do that, you wouldn't get the credit. And I wasn't sure what that meant. But like, to your point, Mike, how is this going to work in practice? Like, do you and outside counsel and the prosecutors kind of sit there on day one and map out, here's what we will and won't ask, so we don't have a Fifth Amendment issue when we're at trial?
Right.
Like, go to that?
Right. Well, here's the thing. It used, like, the old mentality was, go off and do the investigation, give us some download every quarter of what you're getting, and then let's go from there. Now I think the challenge is, if your goal is to serve up individuals, then you have to make sure your outside counsel does it in the right way. In other words, they are truly becoming an arm of the DOJ at that moment. Okay? Your outside counsel could screw up your case such that you're right. The Fifth Amendment. What warnings did you give this individual before you interviewed him? Mm-hmm. Okay. And did he have a right to a lawyer? Did you tell him he had a right to a lawyer? And what if the guy, floundered here or there? Yeah. Do you think I need a lawyer? Should I get a lawyer? I mean, all of these kinds of issues are going to be magnified when you go after individuals. That individual doesn't care anything about the company. They're trying to protect themselves from going to jail. They're going to attack the company. So you better have an investigation that is dotted I's, crossed T's, and is ready to go into federal court. So you're right. This dynamic changes a lot more. I would consult with the prosecutors more.
First off, I immediately wonder how this will work if you have an investigation that goes into Europe, where in many countries, yes, you do get a lawyer if the company calls you, or if you're unionized or something like that. But I should say, for all the listeners, we are going to have a investigations-themed Ethicsverse, I believe, at the end of May, where we are going to touch on some of these issues. I've already been taking down some notes. I wanted to put a question to both of you, though, that actually some attendees were chatting about maybe 20 minutes ago, where will the focus on individual accountability give rise to scapegoats, for lack of a better word? And the company is going to have an incentive to, we got to find somebody somewhere to make it hang on this, because otherwise it's going to hang on the company. That I could see that being very poisonous to a corporate culture. I could actually, some people were wondering, would that lead to a diminishment of the compliance function? Because so long as we give them a scapegoat, we don't really have to worry about anything else. They'll get a declination. And they're sketching out some dark paths that potentially could flow from this. Mike, I'll put it to you first. What do you think about that potential for scapegoat risk? Nick?
I'll be interested to hear Nick's take on it, but I do think that that's a concern. At the one hand, we're figuring out root cause, and at the other hand, we're delivering an individual to be prosecuted. And I think there's a risk that everybody will just say, oh, that was just Mike on a frolic and a detour, bribing some people in Singapore. Or Mike circumventing our sanctions controls just to get some business. When I think the root cause analysis which I think has to become more sophisticated as time goes on, may paint a different picture. It may paint of failures to monitor, supervise. Somebody was asleep at the switch, and I share the concern that I don't want, if compliance turns into let's deliver up ahead, that's not the right thing here. We hold people accountable, but we look at all of our controls, and most importantly, what do we protect? Our culture. Our culture is it. And I don't like the simplistic answer, which is it was all Mike's fault, which I get anyways. You
Story
guys,
of your life,
that. Yeah, I know that. But Nick, Nick,
this can't be like, well, we just have to sacrifice some random virgin to the volcano god. You know what I'm saying? Well, we just have to throw them. We just need to hire a Lee Harvey Oswald. We just need an official patsy. You know what I'm saying? It's got to be. I'm sure it's got to pass muster, right? Like there has to be at least enough evidence attached to this person. And again, I just kind of always go back to well, what's the spirit of the law here? Like, is there a bad actor that actually is the root cause? Is there a bad actor that this individual accountability would apply to? Well, then that's the scapegoat that you should serve up. I can't imagine that they just want some blood. Like, I just need one head to roll and then you get your declination. That can't be what they were thinking about on the massive email chain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but let me give you a scenario, because there was in a trade compliance area, there was a company that served up the CEO of the company they acquired. So let's say the CEO did something wrong, and the CEO is to blame for everything, ran this illegal operation. There are still people around that were complicit that didn't speak up.
Yep. Yeah.
There are people who didn't go to the board. There are people, 20 years ago, we would spend time on the hypothetical of you're a CCO and your CEO is doing something illegal. What do you do at that point? And I think we can't start saying it's the CEO's fault, because there's all these levels of complicity around that person. And that gets to your culture. Culture. If your culture is bring us the problem no matter what, that's a big deal. So I'm worried about, I don't want this to be a simplistic solution. Law and Order comes out, there's the guilty person. There are more answers to this. That's why I look at this whole thing, and I'm trying to not spin it, but I want us in the community to promote the value of ethics and compliance once again. And this is a way to say the investment is worth it, folks. Because 100%. If we have an effective program, first off, our risk goes way down of misconduct. Number two, if something perchance happens where Mike Volkov goes off the reservation, we have an effective program that we can demonstrate to the Department of Justice or regulators or whatever. This is it's a no-brainer to me to invest in ethics and compliance. And this to me is, I want to use this as an opportunity to communicate that message. And look, the remediation aspect here still has the same elements that we've been talking about for ages. So let's use it as another opportunity, okay? And to Nick's point about, look, let's show the board why this is important yet again. I mean, I just look for excuses to talk about that point, and this is 100%. Another excuse.
Yeah, 100%.
And let's say we don't want an individual to get prosecuted because it'll look bad. It'll look terrible.
I will say, number one, for listeners, we have a root cause analysis Ethicsverse coming up, I think in 3 weeks at the end of the month, where we're going to dedicate a whole hour just to that. But one reason the scapegoat thing was weighing on my mind was actually, so Nick, a couple of weeks ago when we did have Karen Moore on with the quarterly wrap up, I remember we were talking about defining individual accountability. And a listener then was saying they were having real struggles with that at their company because they had always had this shared ownership of decision making. And now suddenly executives are saying, whoa, what happened to the shared decision making? And we're all in this together. Now, if it's just me, yikes, I want to make sure my rear end is properly covered. And So I could see why people might drift to wondering about scapegoats, and would that be a shortcut to a declination? On the other hand, if you cough up a scapegoat and then the root cause analysis shows something wildly different, I don't think the company's situation would look too good there. So I know there's a lot of complexity to it, but people are cynical, especially in the lower down the org chart you are, the more cynical you are. And there's a lot of paranoia about, am I going to be the fall guy at the end of this? So I can see why people would wonder about that.
Yeah.
But can I offer just one observation that I think the one thing that I've noticed with clients and companies these days, and maybe you guys share this view, as the sort of turmoil outside the company has been growing and we're going through, tumultuous time, to say the least, what I've noticed is that people inside their companies and employees are looking for stability. They're looking for, I've seen reporting rates going up. I've seen people they're looking for comfort and a mission within their company.
Exactly.
And I think what's going on, and I don't know what you guys, I was curious about your reporting levels and all that. What I'm seeing is people are reporting more because they're concerned about their company. They've given up on outside the company, but they want to hold their company accountable. And so now conflicts of interest are rising. People are complaining about it. If we're not ethically operating, people are complaining about it. And I don't know if you guys are seeing this, but it's led to, we're going to control our environment within the company. And so
That's right.
Now what Matt is positing is this is a little bit of a firebomb thrown in, which is to say, now just serve up one individual and you'll be ethically clean. Whereas I don't think that that's resonating with what people want from their companies. So, but Nick, I wanted to ask you about that because I've seen that just on my anecdotal, and we've had some serious investigations on conflict of interest that resulted in firing of senior executives.
That's so crazy that you said that you brought this thing up. That was the big takeaway from the benchmark report that we just put out a couple of weeks ago, that reporting rates are up. The level of distrust, because I don't know if this focus has shifted from sort of outside to inside the organization, the level of distrust to the organization is higher. People are at a higher rate withholding any identifying information on reporting, but the reporting rate is up. And then we've seen, a massive increase, at least proportionally, for compliance related things, to your exact point about conflicts of interest and stuff like that. So I think, if our data is showing it, and Mike Volkov is seeing it sort of anecdotally, I think that is enough for me to be, again, emboldened to take advantage of this new situation, right? The sea is always moving, right? The dynamics that we're facing sort of socially and sort of corporately are changing all the time. The incentives from the DOJ, and you know what I'm saying? There's all these there's all these whirlpools around us, and we need to take advantage of this wind at our sails and take advantage of exactly what you're talking about. We now have more clarity from DOJ. There's now an increased risk from the CEO himself if we have a crappy program. We now have a lot more fodder, so to speak, from a stakeholder perspective inside the organization to bring more people into a compliance program, not just as a bumper sticker on the car, so to speak, but as an actual mobilizing force to drive more integrity and to de-risk the organization. So I think we've talked for years now about how we can better connect to the business, be a part of the business, not apart from the business, really connect our initiatives to the strategy of the organization and the business's objectives. And now, to your point, we're in this sort of chapter where we have a lot more potential to make that a reality by bringing more stakeholders, more employees into this risk management apparatus that is the compliance program. So, but again, it's on us to be emboldened and take advantage of these new colors on the palette and paint a better picture.
People want to believe in something right now. And the place they're looking to believe in is their leadership, their company, their job, their mission. Why? Okay, Nestle's lost its CEO of years through a subordinate relationship. Why did the kiss cam video go viral? Because people are upset. They want to believe in something. We don't have as much to believe in right now. And this gets back to your point originally, Matt. If you're going to start to say that this was all Mike's fault. I don't think the constituency of employees are not going to just believe that. They're not going to believe that it was just one person who did all this.
Exactly.
I want to squeak in one more question before the end of the hour about how you are supposed to remediate the last part. And if you look at the Justice Department policy, skim past the flow chart, go all the way to the end to the appendix where they talk about an effective compliance program and what that is. I was struck that the policy and the appendix there, they don't actually say thou shalt have a hotline and policies and training and everything. All of it about what an effective program is, they talk about, does the compliance officer have enough resources? Do they have enough skill?
Right.
Do they have enough budget? It's all qualitative rather than a specific checklist of program elements. And that really jumped out at me. I mean, I take it as good news, but Mike, I don't know if you have any interpretation or take on why did they go down that road instead of just listing the elements of a program?
Well, here is where we get to what Nick referred to as the 35-page email. What this is every time I see the emphasis on compliance resources is the line assistants, let's say career people are tired of hearing about we couldn't buy an automated system for $60,000, even though we're a $5 billion company. Okay. Mm-hmm. Or we couldn't hire another person. We only had 3 people doing the whole due diligence for a mega corporate global company. They're so tired of that they want to make it clear up front. And anytime they get a chance to encode a secret message, it is you better have the resources allocated to compliance. And frankly, I'm disheartened because everybody took the FCPA pause and started saying, well, what kind of resources do we really need? Come on, FCPA isn't as big a deal. Without any proper assessment of the fact that they're coming after your trade program like you won't believe, okay? When you stick a bunch of lawyers in an area and say produce, they're going to produce. And that's what they did in the National Security Division. So my concern with that, Matt, is always they're fed up. That if you go in there and say we couldn't get an automated program, we can't afford it. Come on, that doesn't pass the left test these days. So this is all the more reason to get your ship in order and make sure you have what you need to reduce the risk of misconduct and earn the ethical premium.
I will say
also to this point of emboldening, like the answer is always no until you ask. The light is always off until you make sure that it's screwed in. Like you have to go and get it. There's a ton of arguments to make. Yours is going to be a little bit different depending on who your adversary is and what the realities are. But like you can pick any lock. And there's, I would argue that there's never been sort of better circumstances to drive your program forward than where we're at today. For everything that Mike just talked about, for the new guidance, for the new clarity, for the new focus on individual accountability. Like it's on you though at the end of the day. If you're just going to wait to get kind of driven to the destination you want, like your career is not like a Waymo. You know what I'm saying? Like you're still an old school driver. You got to like drive the car to where you got to get it. And if you don't have the resources you need, if you don't have the endorsements you need, like it's on you to go and get it because the answer is always no until you ask. And sometimes you got to ask like 10 times. You know what I mean? You got to keep asking.
Well, that is so well said. And you don't know how many people are not asking for it.
I know.
I was just going to say,
if you don't ask, you don't get. That's what I was raised by. If you don't ask, you don't get. And no is not no. No just means not yet. So you got to just keep pushing, and you have to keep trying to, pick that lock. But I mean, either the stuff we're talking about matters in terms of making organizations better and improving the enterprise value of a company, or it doesn't. I think there's enough evidence out there to land and live in that sort of first camp, but it's on you to make sure that other people are seeing the world through your perspective, because there's so many competing priorities. You have to you have to have that voice. You have to have a strong voice. Be the lone voice crying in the wilderness. Be emboldened by everything we're talking about today, and go and get it. Because like we say all the time, whatever you're asking, you were talking about $60,000 at a $5 billion company. That is like crumbs. That like wouldn't even show up in a financial audit. So very rarely is what you're asking for like a needle mover, but you have to go and get it, you know?
So we are out of time here, but this has been a great discussion. Mike Volkov, thank you very much. We knew that you would dive in, and you did.
It's always good to be with you guys. Always good to be with you.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
you're the man.
A lot of fun.
All right. So we got another couple of episodes. Maybe, Joe, you can drop in there. We obviously have one next Thursday, and I think we have something next Tuesday as well. So be on the lookout for, the write-ups on LinkedIn. We're doing write-ups and summaries of these episodes now. And check out your calendar, because if there's not something on your calendar on Tuesday and Thursday at noon Eastern, then you're missing out. So love you all. See you next week.